Well, I'm Kathleen Staten, Marketing and Events Associate with Ars Lyrica, and I'm thrilled to be here talking with Aryeh Nussbaum Cohen today.
Hello. Glad to be with you from afar, but close still.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Well, I know that as an instrumentalist, it's sometimes challenging to listen back to yourself on recordings. How is it for you to watch yourself back? Because then that's not only an oral component, but a visual component as well.
Yeah. I think most singers, and I guess probably all musicians, hate listening to themselves, and I'm certainly among those folks. Yeah, I think the reality is we're wired to listen with just a deeply, deeply critical ear um, to everything kind of in our art form because that's how we sort of improve, but especially to our own performances because yeah, that's how we improve. So um, I hate listening to myself. All I can hear is the things I did wrong. The oh that note I could have done a little, I could have sung that a little bit better. Oh, I should have made more space on that ah vowel, and so on and so forth. So it's a funny thing that actually I really don't like listening to myself, but I think that's true of a lot of people. And actually, a singer friend of mine said something interesting to me maybe a year ago. We were talking about this exact thing, and he said, "Well, but you know what? The people who do really well in the arts are the ones who are wired in that way to not like listening to themselves, and you have to be wired in that way." And that the reality is that if you listen to yourself and just think, oh wow, I'm really good, then you're not the kind of person who's going to be kind of constantly pushing to improve yourself. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, sort of. I don't know, but it's just kind of part of what we do.
Does the visual component of watching yourself and how you move while you're singing also have that same impact? Does it change how you approach your staging and presence on stage?
A bit, but I would say mainly like when I'm watching videos of myself singing, I'm mostly I have a real close, I can see up front what I'm doing technically with my mouth and all these things, and so I'm mostly critiquing that to myself. It's like, oh, you should have brought your jaw a little bit further back and rotated the back, whatever it is, such little minutia. But that is really the core of kind of how we train and what we do. So yeah, no, it's a similar sort of story.
Do you feel that when you do listen back to these recordings that over the course of your extensive, long career, right? Do you
Oh
feel
yeah.
that your voice has changed over these last few years with all the intensity of singing?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm able to appreciate certain things about my sing. I don't listen and go, "Wow, that guy is total trash. I can't believe anyone would ever put him on a stage." Necessarily, it's more kind of you know, micro critique, but macro, I can certainly see growth and be happy with performances. And oh, absolutely.
How has your voice changed over these years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real thing is just as you age, it's so specific to your voice type, but the reality is that our instrument is inside our body, and so our body is our instrument. And it's an interesting thing that singers, even the greatest, most famous singers of the world, the Renee Flemings, etc., still have to take voice lessons from time to time just to check in because the instrument is constantly changing. So it's, imagine if you were a tuba player and every day you picked up the tuba and the tuba had changed a little bit. I mean, that's a really unnerving sort of thing, and it means you can never really know your instrument because it's always changing. So because of that, I think we're constantly growing and developing and evolving, and sort of figuring out how to make the best possible sounds and have the most artistic impact within what we have on that given day within that given year. So no, it's definitely fun to look back to a couple of years ago and it's like, wow, I was only 23 then, now I'm 26, and it's like, and still I'm so young for a singer, for a voice, for my voice type. Even countertenors have a sort of earlier peak than most other voice types, but still it's just been wonderful, just the natural evolution of my voice, just from purely like getting older and my my body growing, and the spaces, the cavities that things resonated in my body are kind of developing, and that's just what sort of happens as you get towards a kind of prime period for your voice.
What is a prime period for a countertenor, age-wise speaking?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because we have so few case studies for countertenors, whereas if you want to know the shelf life of a kind of like a light lyric soprano, a kind of Pamina or something, or a Queen of the Night or something, it's like a, if you wanted to do a lyric color tour or whatever, you can see many more examples. Whereas countertenors, we really have very few examples of people who have sung a full career as a countertenor in big theaters, etc. But it seems like generally it's kind of like you sort of start hitting your peak in your early 30s and it runs through kind of your mid 40s. And then by the time you're 50, the voice starts to, or by the time you're 50, the voice has, faded away quite a bit. So it's a shorter kind of period, but what's nice is that it's a little bit earlier. Whereas, if you're a bass of any variety, really, you're not really starting to hit a stride until mid 30s at the earliest, really your 40s. The benefit is that, you have these famous basses who are in their 70s who are singing on the great operatic stages of the world still and selling out houses and so on. But I kind of, it's nice not to have to wait so long. And it's the same thing with these dramatic voices, like dramatic sopranos who go on to sing Wagner and Strauss and all these things. And those folks who end up having these huge careers spent years and years, working at Macy's and restaurants and all these things just to get by because, well, their voice was still just waiting to develop. So I'm kind of glad that I don't have to wait as long and that, my voice is already starting to come into what its ultimate sort of peak will be. And for that, I'm also grateful that I kind of got a young start on, singing professionally. So yeah,
Tell
I
us
can't.
about that start. So was your big breakthrough start with the Met?
Yeah. Yeah, it was the Met competition in 2017. I have the review framed up here in my office of this. So I competed in the Met competition in 2017, kind of on a whim. I wasn't planning on doing it for a couple years because I didn't think I was ready. And a couple days before the deadline, I happened to have a voice lesson with my voice teacher, and I asked him, "Oh, should I join the Met competition? They have it here in New York, obviously. I don't think I'm ready, but I don't know." And he said, "Oh, why not? It's $20 application fee, nothing to lose, and you get some feedback. It's like you pay to sing an audition and you get some feedback and you take it and move along." So I said, okay. And obviously I'm sure glad that Doc White, my teacher, recommended I enter because, it obviously ended up going far better than I had anticipated. And then the thing that really changed my life was, because the Met competition has multiple winners every year. So it's well over 1,000 entrants and they pick usually 5 winners in the finals. Our year there were 6 winners out of the 9, so it was because it was an exceptionally strong class of singers, it was an amazing group of singers. And that was, crazy, and I could barely sleep the night after that. I got maybe an hour of sleep, of course, but then I wake up the next morning and I'm sitting in bed, and I knew that the New York Times always reviews the Met competition, and I had done a couple other competitions before that the New York Times usually reviews, but they hadn't reviewed them anytime I'd been there. So I'd never been mentioned in the paper of record, and it's my hometown paper, of course. So that day, that afternoon, I just Googled to see, oh, I wonder if the New York Times reviews come out. And well, my jaw absolutely dropped because I opened Google and I see this headline: Met Opera discovers a young star, Aryeh Nussbaum Cohen. And I was like, and it was like, what? Yeah. And, in the papers, a star amid rising stars. It was like this whole crazy review, where, I'm forever indebted to Zachary Wolf, the head editor of the classical music section of the Times, who was the critic that day. And, yeah, I mean, he wrote A Star is Born. There was one complete artist, all these, I mean, it was just crazy. And it really kind of changed my life overnight. So I've never met Mr. Wolf, but I always say if I ever run into him, drinks on me. So thank you, Zachary Wolf.
I can't even imagine. So you went from just a guy on the street to internet and singing sensation overnight. Has the glow worn off from that at all?
Oh no, it'll never kind of get old. And I think people in a lot of industries, not just arts, but have, sort of imposter syndrome, about various things. I certainly have that about that kind of stuff. And I don't think I'll ever get used to that. It'll always be like, really? Me? Just doesn't really make sense to me, but I sure am glad that other people feel that way.
So when you are coping with that sort of feeling of expectation, does it feel different on different stages and with different groups that you're working with?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing, especially for me, is competitions are so stressful, always have been, always will be. And especially, sort of after that, after getting that review for a competition performance, it's like, oh, wow. I have a certain standard I want to try to meet. And it's a funny thing because when I was first doing competitions and like doing the Met competition and all this, I was looking at the other singers who were like the sort of, the young star singers who were the favorites or whatever. And it was this whole thing of, I was like, wow, I can't imagine being them or whatever. And now it's a weird thing where I imagine that when I, enter a vocal competition, other singers are probably like, oh God, that Aryeh guy is competing or something. He's that guy from the New York Times or something. And it's like, oh God, I hate thinking about that because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not some big divo who's like, oh yes, I am that guy. That's just not my personality at all. But it's been funny just kind of working that out over the couple of years, I guess. And, when I did a competition like Operalia, which I did this past summer, which was the first kind of international competition I had done all these American competitions, but this was my first time competing against, these great young singers from all over the world. And yeah, that's where I really felt the kind of pressure of expectations, especially of, wow, okay, I have a certain standard I want to meet, let alone just the pressure of, oh, who's on the judging panel? Oh, it's the casting directors of, almost every major opera house in the world. Oh, great. Every time I open my mouth in this competition is like a big high risk, high reward audition for this panel of like 14 people or something. Obviously it ended up working out pretty well. I came in third place. I was the only American to place, so I was happy about that. But it's stressful. I say that every competition I do, it's wonderful. And I actually was just yesterday talking to a young countertenor who was asking me for some advice. And he was asking me about competitions, all these things. And I was saying, the reality is that there's no better opportunity for exposure. And for, obviously it's like a nice little boost of money you get when you win a competition. But more than that, it's such a great way of getting your name out there to so many people in such a quick way. And it's kind of unparalleled because even if I give an amazing performance at Ars Lyrica, and even if it's being live streamed, et cetera, which is fabulous, it still only reaches a certain audience. Whereas with a competition, it's just so many people are following these couple vocal competitions. It's such a funny thing that we have this sort of structure even in the arts because it seems so kind of athletic and it seems like it's from another world.
I know that you at least used to be cantor for your synagogue, right?
Yeah.
Is that a place and a space where you could let it go and have a different purpose for your singing, or do you still feel scrutinized?
Yeah, it's funny. That was all kind of when I was younger before I took it really seriously as a profession or anything. So I didn't really feel very much pressure, which was wonderful. But for me, it was a really great way to just grow artistically because when we think of Judaism, probably the first word that pops into people's minds is tradition, and it comes from Fiddler on the Roof. That people think that, but it's really true that it's a culture and a faith that's really built around a certain set of traditions, more maybe than any other, at least in the Western world, kind of that we sort of know. And so the reality of that is there's these. It rings true in the music as well, and so the music of Jewish prayer services and all these things it's a beautiful set of melodies and musical modes and all these things that have been passed down from generation to generation. Many of the best melodies on the high holidays when I used to cantor are called Mi Sinai, from Mount Sinai. And the idea is that God handed these melodies and musical modes down to Moses at Mount Sinai, and they've kind of passed from generation to generation since. So even if you don't believe that's true, this music has still come for hundreds of years. And what's beautiful about it is that it's this set of modes that you as the cantor are supposed to kind of use and improvise within. So it's not some kind of rigid thing where you get given a score and it's like, okay, this is this prayer, you go. It's this whole sort of set of musical motions that you have to figure out how you want to phrase and work within. And so obviously I had no intention of being a professional singer when I was doing all that and learning all that, but it just gave me this wonderful kind of sense of musicality and artistry, I think, because that's the whole role of a good cantor, is to really move musically and artistically instead of in some kind of rigid structure. So I'm really grateful for the sort of training that gave me, even if I was kind of blissfully unaware at the time.
I do. I think those things all impact us, right? All of those performances that we get to do, they leave a mark on us, and it's sort of like the Japanese teacups, right? That when they get a break, they paint them cracks in gold because the experiences of trial and error are revered as part of what makes something beautiful as it gets older.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about, of course, some of your Ars Lyrica performances.
Absolutely.
We are so thrilled to have you as part of the Ars Lyrica family. I mean, talking with artists, especially with you, has just been this incredible experience to have an opportunity to connect. And I know you were talking about not being Il Divo backstage at the competition and imagining that starstruck factor. But I'll tell you, getting to reach out to all of these artists myself and like visit with them, I have a little bit of that myself. Like, oh my
Oh gosh.
I'm going to call Aryeh and visit with him. Like, I'm his friend and we're just going for coffee. And it's actually, it sort of tickles me. And I delight in it personally, but as well as in sharing it with our audiences. I just think that hearing from you about what the experience is like, it brings so much more life to the music. Ars Lyrica in particular has scheduled you with some very interesting repertoire. One of the pieces I wanted to talk with you about is what it was like to sing Samuel Felsted's Jonah. So having a Jamaican Baroque piece is really out there, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that was my first time doing something like that, that's for sure.
Yeah, what's it like to sort of put your mark or stamp on a piece or a role that doesn't have an already attached vision of how it's supposed to go that comes along with it?
Yeah, I think it's even more liberating, but the reality is that, at least for me, when I'm learning anything, whether it's the most famous aria by Handel or a world premiere or something that no one's heard before, in my mind, you have to approach it the same kind of way and sort of imagine that you're the first person to learn it and you want to put your mark, you just want to perform it in the way that's artistically meaningful to you. So it's an interesting thing also talking about singers and, kind of traditions among singers and all these things, but that, a lot of people have very strict rules about listening to recordings.
Those rules like,
And
Aryeh, can you tell us?
yeah,
Like,
so a lot of
don't,
singers,
right?
I mean, will never listen to a recording of anything they're singing, at least until after they perform it or anything, because the reality is that that kind of artistic growth mindset, whatever, you are a sponge for all of your artistic influences and musical influences and all this stuff. And that's the reality of being an artist. And you don't want to accidentally do things that you heard that sound like you're just copying that other singer. You want to create your own interpretation. So I'm not someone who's like super strict that, oh gosh, if someone starts playing this role I'm singing in a year, I'm going to tell them to shut it up. I'm not like that. But I certainly I don't listen to recordings to try and figure out my interpretation in any kind of way. So yeah, so in that way, it's kind of all the same, if that makes sense, that, I really just want to learn things as myself and sing them as myself with my previous influences and so on, but not, not trying to emulate a great performance that this or that person gave.
Right. Yeah. I think it was interesting for the orchestra as well to explore that when you're so steeped in the concept, like you were talking about before, of tradition, right? That you know how it goes, or you know how this is supposed to turn out. The idea that you get to discover something new in something old is a dichotomy that we as musicians in the period performance industry don't frequently get to experience anymore.
Yeah. Oh, it's very true. But in a way, we're always discovering new things in the old, and I think that's what audiences love, is that it's it's such an interesting thing to take works that were written hundreds of years ago for totally different audiences and contexts and societies and put our own imprint on them and make them fresh and alive, for an audience today. And there's often something even more meaningful about that for an audience than just something that's new, even though something that's new is wonderful. But it's this whole sort of process of layering that I think just adds even more to a performance and to the experience of an audience.
Phenomenal. Well, we'll have a listen to an excerpt from that oratorio right now.
Delighted murmurs around their guest, astonished to listen to his bold request. They hear and with reluctance grant, away yawning, receives and bears into his grave. Within a whimsy mistrust confide, trembling, he sees not all, I am aside.
Another question I wanted to ask you was, who writes the best for your voice type in the Baroque period?
Ooh, an interesting question. What I would say is that obviously the two most famous composers, of the era are Bach and Handel.
Oh, well
Um,
done, Aryeh, since those were the two other pieces I picked. Well
well,
done.
perfect.
Ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Exactly. I'll look forward to receiving my prize. Thank you very much. It can be a Zoom prize. But no, so those are obviously the two most famous composers. And what's funny is that to me they feel so different. Both wonderful to sing, but so different, very different to learn as well. And so I mean, obviously the harmonic language of Bach is so complex. And part of it is just that he was such a German composer, and it's really, I mean, some of these Bach cantatas and Bach works I've gotten to sing, I mean, they really feel like predecessors to Strauss and all of these, I mean, great German composers, which it's just so crazy to think of finding root for that in the Baroque era, which we think of as being these kind of simple, elegant pieces. But Bach really isn't like that. So Bach takes me a much longer time to learn, but the payoff, and Bach often, singers will say, and it's really true, like Bach did not write for the voice. He wrote for the voice as an instrument. So you really have to work to find places to breathe and all these things. It's not really designed for the voice, even if it showcases it so beautifully. So to me, Bach is a lot harder to prepare, but the payoff is amazing because of the complexity. And what's brilliant is that what I think is so, one of the things I say to people who are like, oh, I don't really like Baroque music, why do you find it interesting? Is that what's amazing to me is that at that time, composers of the world and just the world had discovered such a limited set of musical kind of like a musical language that it's just so much more limited than what composers today, for example, have at their disposal. And to think the depth of emotion and feeling that these composers managed to get with such a limited palette. I mean, it's, if you think about a painter only having primary colors and creating the most beautiful, impactful painting with it, as opposed to a painter today who has so many textures and materials that are at their disposal. It is such an incredible thing that these composers managed to achieve, with which they managed to achieve it with such limited means. And so that to me is like the hallmark of the Baroque era, and Bach is just such a great example for that, where he managed to create such a complex kind of structure within such simplicity that he had at his disposal. And it's really amazing. But then on the other hand, you have Handel, whose musical language is much more simple, but has such a depth to it. And there's something just so impactful, at least for me, of the way that Handel writes for the voice, especially because Handel was really a singer's composer. And of course, he was writing really specifically for the singers he was composing for, which is the hallmark of a great singer's composer. The reality of that is that it means there are certain things that we can't achieve today that his singers did. If you look at all these castrati who he wrote all these things for, I mean,
Well,
their
and
lung
even
capacity.
revised for. So, depending
Oh
on the
yeah,
performance, would totally revise the score to make it suit you. Wouldn't that be wonderful if every opera performance was like that?
absolutely. Oh yeah, well, and it's one of the things that drives me crazy that there are still many conductors and just people who take a score as like, this is the written word from God and we can't do anything to it. But that is not, and that may be true for later composers, and it is true for like a composer like Puccini, who wrote every detail of what he wanted in the score, and it was like, this is what you do, go. But in the Baroque era, I mean, they were throwing things out, rewriting things constantly, adapting everything to every singer who was doing it for any given performance. So Handel would write an opera, and let's say, one of his most famous operas, like Julius Caesar, which was revived multiple times, each revival, he was throwing things out, changing the keys, alternating everything to fit the singers who were singing it then, which is what it should be. But the reality is that only one version ends up in the score. And there's still a lot of people who don't want to change any, and it's just a funny thing to me, because I think if Handel were here, he would you know, if let's say I'm performing a Handel opera and, oh, that aria sits a little bit low for me, but up a step, you know, if you just bring it up just a step, it would really shine in my voice. And there are a lot of people who are really resistant to doing that because they feel, oh, you know, that's not what the composer, that is absolutely what Handel intended. That's what he would have done. Um, anyway, so, but the reality is that, so these castrati had scientifically about double the lung capacity that a countertenor has today. And so a lot of Handel's lines that he wrote are so long because they were written for specific singers who had about twice as much lung capacity as I do, for example. But Handel's music, to me, it just, so intellectually, I think I love singing Bach the most, but emotionally, I love singing Handel the most because Handel's music just really kind of hits me at my core when I sing it. But they're certainly two favorites.
Ah, fantastic. Well, they're two of our favorites as well. I
Mhm.
wanted to start by listening to an excerpt from, and I'm sure you can correct this instrumentalist German here. It's one of Bach's secular cantatas, 198, Las Fürsten, las nach einen Strahl. How did I do?
The Trauerrot. Yeah, you did beautifully, beautifully. Yeah, it's an amazing piece.
What do you love about that? I thought it was a very interesting choice. It's, first of all, it's an amazing showcase not only of you but also of two of our favorite gamba players,
Mm.
Mary Springfells
Oh,
and Barry Sills. And
yeah,
we
they
don't,
played absolutely beautifully.
yeah, and we don't often get to see those two instruments highlighted. They're usually a part of the continuo or on a rare piece featured solo. So an incredible backdrop for what you sang.
Yeah. Oh, and this aria that you're going to play, it was one of my favorite things I've ever sung just because of the beautiful interweaving that Bach did with those two gambas. I mean, it's just, it's such an extraordinary texture to sing on top of, and it's such a flexible texture. And they're both amazing players who were listening so intimately to everything that I was doing. And so I felt so supported every breath that I was taking, and by Matthew as well. I mean, it just really felt like I could paint with the full palette I had and not worry about X or Y or Z, you know, that they were really right there with me. It was really a joy.
Wow. That's incredible to hear because I know that the continuo teams, we've talked about it with some of our violinists like Alana Yousefian,
Mm,
that you've got to solo with a different person every single week when you're a freelancer. And as a
yeah,
continuo team too, you know, in some cities like New York or San Francisco, there are teams that sort of travel, you know, hire this group and things like that.
yeah,
But a lot of times these people, at least in Houston, they have lots of gigs. So you're not always sitting
yeah,
down with the same people. So to have that
absolutely.
on stage and that communication and ability to be flexible, right? To explore the possibilities that Bach wrote for you is incredible on this Houston stage.
Absolutely. Well, and I'd say one of the wonderful things that I felt over the years, it's crazy to even say that, but singing with Ars Lyrica has been really developing that relationship with the players that I feel so supported and so at home. And it's just the reality of the first time you make art with someone, you're sort of, everyone's kind of feeling it out. And then over time you can just really settle in and not worry, and you just feel so at home.
We love to hear that, and I think that's part of the feeling that we have on Ars Lyrica stage with you. You know, after the
Mm,
concerts, we get to visit with you and have these opportunities to chat with you about the music as well. So it's more than just a concert; it's a relationship with the people on stage and with for our audiences as well.
absolutely.
Let's have a listen to that Bach.
Die Glocken lebendes Getön, soll uns in trüben Seelen schrecken, durch ihr Geschwung Gesetze wecken und uns durch Morgen Tonen gehen. Könnte nur dies bange klingen, davon das Ohr uns täglich gelt, der ganze Leid und Elend, ein Zeugnis unseres Jahres bringen.
Our final listen today is one of your arias and recitatives from Agrippina. And in fact, as I was talking to a colleague, I was putting together the playlist for this chat, and it started without my knowledge. And she heard the diminished chord that starts that recital, and she said, "Oh, I know what you're listening to."
It's very distinctive, but it's a very powerful piece of music.
Unstable, unsettling, dramatic, emotional.
Yeah.
From the beginning
Yeah.
of that ride until the end of that aria when the curtain closes, it is one breathtaking, gut-wrenching, emotional roller coaster, and we just feel like we are on it with you every second. What was it like to sing that?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about to achieve that kind of depth of emotion and that kind of breadth of emotion with such a limited palette. And this is such an incredible example of that, where within such a limited palette that Handel was painting with, the journey that he manages to take you on. I mean, it's just extraordinary, where that recitative starts in this kind of just this journey from pathetic to outraged, and ultimately coming back to just being so heartbroken and pathetic. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but Ottone has been so reduced, and he's really just at a loss for how everyone around him has betrayed him. And that feeling, I mean, just the feeling that Handel puts in that music, I mean, it's just extraordinary. It's a joy to sing. This aria is something I've taken with me as one of my kind of audition arias and sung in competitions after, and all these things. And it's just, it's a joy to sing every time. I mean, it's an amazing journey to go on every time. And to me as an artist, that's my favorite thing, is going on that journey, getting to experience that journey and hopefully take others on it. But selfishly, more than really for anyone else, it's like what's gratifying about it is me going on that journey. You know, for me, that's what's gratifying. That I hope obviously an audience has a response, but that for me to dig into emotions and experiences in my own life that bring about the emotion of you know, a given moment in an opera or a concert work. That to me is what it's all about. That's why I love what I get to do for a living. And this aria is just a great example of that, where he's pulling on, you know, or I as the artist, I'm pulling on a lot of experiences in my life that aren't so positive, but that it's really gratifying to come out on the other side of, and to get to relive that is a really powerful thing.
Yeah, there's something you cannot hide from in Baroque opera. It seems different. The Baroque opera we know is meant to elicit those emotions. And in fact, I've always been fascinated by reading about how they imagined that it manipulated the body physically and emotionally, the whole concept of doctrine of affections. And then to find out later, proved by science, that some of these things are true. They're very true.
Oh, absolutely. And even still, I remember seeing like a year ago a new study about how people in an audience, about how their heart rates, you know, they were studying the heart rates of audience members as they attend a performance. It's like, of course it's impacted, and you have this collective swell and these, you know, just this human connection. And that's what we're always seeking, obviously, when we go to see any art, whether it's Beyonce or Agrippina. And you know, it's just really gratifying as an artist to hopefully help bring some of that to people, that kind of connection, that silent connection with other people.
There's something so intangibly incredible that links us when we experience the arts at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this emotional roller coaster is, I think, one of our listeners' favorites, and certainly one of mine. So let's have a listen to an excerpt from Agrippina.
And mine too. One of my favorites too.
Figli amici, e cieli giusti,
Aryeh, thank you so much for sitting down with us so that we can connect our audiences with you and with some of the amazing highlights of music that you've made with Ars Lyrica over these past few years.
My pleasure, and just a joy to kind of reconnect with the Ars Lyrica family. From afar. Obviously, we're supposed to be together again in a couple weeks, and obviously, while that's not going to be able to happen, I look forward to the next time, and hope everyone stays healthy, sane, and happy. And the thing that's been keeping me sane is just always finding the silver linings in everything, even in such a horrible time like this one. I'm still just trying to stay positive and find the silver linings in everything in our lives, and I hope we can all kind of continue to do that in the weeks and months ahead. But lovely to be with you all, and thanks for having me.
Well, this interview has been a silver lining for me, and I'm sure for our audiences today. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon.